2017. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, good morning. Chair Liu.
Present.
Vice Chair Kim.
Here.
Board Member Firth.
Here.
Board Member Balte.
Present.
And just for the record, Board Member Guyer is absent today. Now is the time for oral communications. The public may speak to an item that's not on the agenda. And I don't have any. I do have a speaker card for our first item. Are there any agenda changes? No? And then so let's go into the first item, which is number 2, which is a study session. Preliminary review for 375 Hamilton, downtown parking garage. A preliminary architectural review of a new 5-story parking garage with 1 basement parking level with 1,709 square feet of ground floor retail, bike storage, and 331 parking spaces located on a 29,164 square foot surface parking lot. And the zone district is public facilities. The environmental assessment is an initial study, has been prepared in accordance with CEQA, and the draft EIR will be prepared with the formal application. And so we have Amy French, our Chief Planning Official. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Amy French. Today you are looking at 3 options in a study session format for a preliminary design for the downtown parking garage at 375 Hamilton. The slide on the screen has 1 and 2 options mislabeled. So the one to the left is option 2, the one to the right is option 1, and the one at the bottom is option 3, as noted. Just a quick review. This is going to be going through a CEQA process for environmental review. This did go to a scoping session with the Planning Commission and a meeting with the Council to confirm the direction of the project, which includes 1 basement level, and they added a top level additional floor to maximize the parking on the site. The HRB reviewed this last week, and now it's your turn. The Planning and Transportation Commission will be looking at a code amendment in October 11th, to modify the PF development standards that set forth the special setbacks and setbacks and floor area ratios, this kind of thing. So there's going to be some amendments going forward to the Planning Commission and Council. We expect to see the application to come in about October, and then the follow-up will be the environmental review. This will all be going to the City Council. So your recommendation is to Council, but not today. We're looking at direction. So just a quick recap. The HRB saw this last week. The packet page 13 does discuss what the HRB was asked to do. Specifically compatibility with nearby historic resources. There are 3 nearby historic resources. And to take a look at architectural review finding 2B to assist staff in the HRB. 1 member was concerned about the special setback encroachment and suggested that the city consider 2 basement levels and lopping off the top floor. Several members preferred the option 1, which was the screen. Excuse me, but with some openings in that mesh to give it more interest. They did note the benefits of the 2nd-story horizontal line on that option 1 with the colonnade that reflects the post office. And they appreciated a step back at the upper floors, and the desire for street trees on Hamilton was expressed. A couple of folks talked about the Spanish Mediterranean revival style and thought that the tower might be an opportunity to express some of that Burge Clark ironwork in some way. Just showing you the 3 nearby historic resources. We have a Victorian on the left with a turret there. We have the sport shop there, which is coming forward at some point soon for rehab to more historic and potentially adding some residential on the top floor there. And then we have, of course, the post office across the street with its colonnade. These are the considerations at this time. We have finding 2B that looks at the compatibility and nearby historic resources. We also have the Downtown Urban Design Guideline. There are 2 goals for the Hamilton Avenue District. And there are guidelines as well. I have those on the screen. They're in your staff report as well. One thing to note is that there is a look at the Hamilton frontage. We do have a bus stop there, and we have the opportunity to widen the sidewalk. It's pretty narrow at this time, so they're looking at putting a wider sidewalk there to match what's in front of that AT&T building next door. Okay, so I'm going to load the applicant's presentation. So Holly Boyd with Public Works is the project manager, and we. Okay.
Hi, Holly Boyd, Public Works Engineering. I did have one correction. Originally, our council proposal was for 5 stories above ground, and when we went to council in April, they actually added the below grade basement to the project, so it's 5 above and 1 below. Thanks.
And now we have Ken Hayes, who is going to give a presentation.
See how it works. All right, good. Good morning, Chair Liu, members of the board. My name is Ken Hayes with Hayes Group Architects. I'll be making the presentation on behalf of the team. There we go. I am joined by Watcher Design this morning, Michelle Wendler and Gordon Knowles, if there's questions about the specifics of the garage itself. The site, as we know, is a 29,000 square foot parcel on the corner of Waverly and Hamilton. It's an L-shaped parcel currently occupied by a city parking lot. In terms of the context, right across, so this is Hamilton here, right across the street we have the Palo Alto Post Office, a Category 1 historic structure, as well as a National Registry building located here. And then on Waverly Street, we have the Palo Alto Sports structure, which is a Category 3. The Victorian House next to that's Category 2. And on the corner here at University Avenue and Waverly is the Decker Oaks building, and that's a Category 3 historic resource. The property is currently zoned PF. Surrounding properties on this side, at least, are primarily CDC, P, ground floor restricted uses. Across Hamilton, the ground floor restricted uses is not enough. At the rear, along the property here, accessed from Waverly is a one-way alley called Lane 21. And it provides access to the back of CVS and the stores actually along Waverly here to the backs of those. There's also a parking space in the back of lot 84, I believe. The views of the existing buildings in the neighborhood, we have the AT&T building. It's about 74, 75 feet tall. Has a interesting brick base to it with the big block on top. We have the All Saints Episcopal Church, which is primarily a building in the landscape. We have the Post Office, which is the Category 1 historic building. We have 400 Hamilton, which is kind of a brick post and beam office building with some ground floor sort of public space out in front. A little bit closer in, the post office has the beautiful tile roofs. The arcade has some nice metal work that we can draw from, deep shades and recesses. And then along Waverly, we have the Palo Alto Sports Shop here, a little more modest, and then the completely different Victorian building next to that. This ground floor is all primarily retail or retail-like, ending in this building here, I think at 510, and so our property is just to the left of that. The program is a 4-story but 5-level, because we're parking on the roof, structure with above ground with 1 level of basement parking. 330 stalls the city dictated, plus 1 stall to replace the stall that we would lose at the back of lot 84, which is located in here. So that will have a stall in the parking structure for a total of 331. Council would like to see about 1,700 square feet of retail fronting on Waverly Street and a shared trash enclosure for the buildings kind of in this area, as well as a bike storage facility incorporated into the structure itself. The design constraints, we have setback issues here. On this side here, we've got to provide a solid wall. There's zero setback because of opening penetrations would be an issue. And so that's a solid wall. We have a 16-foot setback on the back of the buildings that front onto Waverly Street. And the reason for that is to provide some pedestrian access for utilities. We can bring our potentially trash and that sort of thing out into this area. It also provides for protection of openings, create the open space there so the garage can be open and we're not impacting the windows that are in the backs of the existing buildings. So it's kind of a dictated setback at that location. Same thing is true along this edge of the property. Here's the property line, but we're going to set 10 feet back so that we can have an open parking structure with unprotected openings. And as you've probably noticed, the 510 existing building has windows on the property line, so it allows for those to continue, for daylight penetration into that existing building. And then we have a special setback along Hamilton of 7 feet located there, with the AT&T building is on that special setback. We have a requirement for 65.25 feet, essentially, to get the parking dimension to work, and the dimension that we have is 66 feet. So we have 3/4 of a foot extra, basically, in that leg of the L. On this leg of the L, we're required to have 87.5 feet because of the 2 aisles of parking as well as the driveway or the ramp, and we have 90 feet. And so we have about 2.5 feet of extra space there that we'll be using essentially for articulating the facade. The garage is an open, ventilated parking garage, other than the basement level, which will be mechanically ventilated, but the floors above grade will all be designed as a open parking structure. So we're required to have lots of openings in the walls, essentially around the perimeter. And because of this wall being solid, as well as some others being solid, that is a bit of a challenge for this project. We have a 2-foot zone basically running around this edge where we can start to create some articulation and relief that's outside of the main structure of the garage. So that's clear of the columns that support the garage. Auto access, this is the alley that's one way in that direction coming off of Waverly, headed over to Bryant. And we're going to keep the entrance to the garage almost in the same place that it is today for the entrance for the parking lot. And then this will be an entrance and exit also at that location. So we're eliminating all the access from Waverly Street. In terms of pedestrian access, we're trying to create an alley here, and the alley will then turn and kind of create this zone in back of the Waverly buildings. The corner sort of open courtyard space is also a pedestrian focus, and those both terminate on stair and elevator cores. So in both these locations, we'll have stairs and elevators. And then the retail rhythm of the street will be maintained along that street edge and placing the retail space here. It's about 1,700 square feet, excuse me. So in all the concepts before you, 1 through 3 today, the locations of vertical circulation, of the entrance to the garage, those elements have stayed the same in all the concepts. So what we're looking at is different ways of the look and feel and expressing the form. We understand that we're going to have opportunities for pedestrian amenities and seating and that sort of thing along the ground floor. We can talk about that as we look at the alternatives. These are some I guess local. This garage here, some precedence is over at Stanford. This is San Jose. I think it's a 4th Street garage, and this is a garage in Claremont, California. What I like about all these garages is that they're richly detailed. There's a lot of relief, a lot of shade and shadow with the deep recesses and so on, and they kind of change character at night because of the use of metal screen in this particular garage here. This garage also has some metal screening here that becomes transparent at night. I like the outdoor spaces that are created here, as well as this has a pedestrian zone retail space basically on the whole ground floor here, and then a stair comes down into that space that leads you up into the first level of the parking. Wayfinding is pretty obvious and very important in a public parking facility, from being able to find where you are, know where you've parked your car, and for safety reasons. And so the idea of the stairs being very well defined in all of these garages, I think, makes sense. And so we're trying to incorporate that also into the building. Just some close-ups of ways of screening. This is a metal mesh, and the reason the metal mesh is it's very open. We can achieve some sense of screening to create the feeling of a block or of a mass, but allow that transparency to take place for ventilation purposes. This is a metal mesh at the Epiphany. This is actually a brick screen wall that could be very interesting, perhaps on the ground floor, because there's a lot of, if you go back to the pictures of the context, 400 Hamilton, it's a brick masonry building, it's a veneer. The AT&T building, a lot of brick, and I can't believe I'm almost out of time already.
Ken, it's a study session. We can,
okay.
And we only have one main item on the agenda, so,
Okay, so I don't want to rush. Okay, normally I start to rush at this point.
give you 2 more minutes.
And so, so this is some ideas for mesh, whether it's metal or brick. Obviously, the brick would be probably lower level. And then this is some kind of a louver treatment. Concept 1, the idea is to create the block of the garage, get that mass on the corner to sort of hold the corner relative to the AT&T building next door, but incorporate a rhythm of arcade, let's say on the ground floor, that is reminiscent of the post office. Create a vertical stair element that is easily recognizable. So this is the Hamilton facade, and then the Waverly facade. We would continue the rhythm of the storefronts and try to create some form that relates to 510 Waverly next door, and then it slowly transitions into the entrance of the parking structure. So this is a view from Waverly, looking towards the post office on the left. So opposite the entrance to the post office is essentially the entrance to the garage for pedestrians. The stair defines that. The height of the first 2 floors is defined here. It approximately lines up with the roof of the post office, and then we would repeat that, the rhythm as we march down Hamilton. The garage entrance approximately in the same location as it is today. We've separated the garage from the AT&T building by about a 20-foot reveal, so that there's a gap in the rhythm, but it's also a screened gap. This shows opportunities for pedestrian seating and landscaping at the ground floor. And then on the Hamilton Street facade, that would actually wrap, and this is the entrance to the pedestrian alley that takes you down. Sorry? Waverly. So, what did I say the second time? Hamilton, Waverly. Okay. We're on Waverly Street, and then the garages are shielded above. This stair comes down into a small courtyard, opportunities for seating. Obviously, this could spill out here for retail purposes. The other concept picks up on the AT&T building, where we try to express the mass a little bit more formally. We still have the gap here between the AT&T building and the parking garage. Try to express some kind of artistic treatment of the ground floor that might be reminiscent of the metalwork or the brickwork or something that you might find at the post office. So an opportunity actually for an artisan perhaps to get involved at that ground floor. And along Hamilton, and then along Waverly Street, it would be retail space on just that first level and expressed in that way. Same views looking towards the post office on the left, the stairs in the same place, but a little bit different expression. Start to look at this post and beam kind of idea that you see on the diagonal corner at 400 Hamilton, the brick building. So it starts to draw from a number of the neighboring buildings. You can see where we could have this ground floor artistic metalwork, bars, twisted wrought iron, or something that then could climb up the building. The HRB thought that could actually be incorporated into the stair in some way. We've picked up on the openings of the AT&T building, these just big extrusions that kind of protrude from the facade, thinking that this would be some kind of a metal mesh. And then as we come down Waverly, this is the entrance again to the pedestrian area. A little bit more generous plaza. The stair comes down as a broader stair into that space, but the actual area allocated is the same in all of these concepts. Then the third concept, a little bit different. Instead of using a metal mesh, we would use some kind of a louvered approach to define the mass of the building above, again, to hold the corner relative to the AT&T building and the downtown plan. We would, this is kind of a hybrid, we would still pick up on this arcade of the post office on the first 2 floors here, the elevator, stairs all in the same location. The ground floor could be some kind of the brick mesh, the brick screening rather, perforated wall, or the metal work on the ground floor. On Waverly Street, we would again go back to a 2-story expression to relate to the building next door and the ground floor retail that occurs there. Same view. The stair has turned in this option, comes down to the same plaza here, however. The ground floor retail is expressed. This is this idea of these fins that could pick up on the terracotta color of the brick across the street, the tile roofs, both on Waverly and on the post office. View from the other direction with the entrance. And then as it goes down the pedestrian alley. And then this plaza is set back even more because the stair has been turned, so it's more open, let's say, for that retail to spill out and create some seating opportunities. We see seating opportunities in these recesses as well. Great place to sit and look at a Category 1 historic resource across the street. Of course, there'll be landscaping and so on. We're not yet at that point. This is more about the massing, and that concludes my presentation. I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you, Ken. Okay, so we're going to do the speakers. We have 2 public speakers, and then get to board member questions and comments. And I do have one little announcement: is that that Castellea School expansion was originally scheduled to be on the agenda today, and they pulled it off of the agenda because they.
Applicant requested postponement, and so we sent out notices, and so I think we did a pretty good job advertising the cancellation.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if anybody was tuning in and they're looking forward, that's what happened today. Okay, so we have 2 speakers, Elizabeth Wong and Roxy Rapp, and you each have 5 minutes.
Go ahead. No, use please. Sure.
Maybe we can put
Here,
some
she wants
images.
it. Yeah. That one? Okay.
Buenos días. Me llamo Elizabeth Wong y a la ciudad de Palo Alto, a los miembros del ARB y al estimado público. Well, the reason I'm saying that is because I grew up in Buenos Aires and Spanish is my natural language. So every time I come and make a speech, I have this language impediment, but I'll try to not to tax your ears. So this is the 3rd time that I bring similar issues concerning this parking garage. We own, what happened? We're the owners of the lot number 85, which is adjacent to the parking garage. And there are some things that are very important and that I expressed 3 times, as I said before, and I want to bring it to the public's attention. They fall into 2 categories. One, as it relates to the adjacent buildings, and the second category is as it relates to the garage itself. Concerning the first category, I have a problem with the access for future residences at my building as well as the adjacent building, but I will speak only to my building. So by making a walkway between the garage and the rear of lot 85, you pretty much choke the traffic, the car movement on that in that strip or in that parking space. So one of the, we met with Amy French and Holly Boyd, and one of the suggestions that came up, and Brad Ezekian, one of the suggestions that came up was the idea of tunneling a path from the underground parking to the underground of lots 85 and 84, so that it can provide on-site parking for future residences. I believe this is a concept that has been used in the city before, and it was said that it was at the meeting that it was used at the city before, and I would like to very strongly you to consider that opportunity. Otherwise, we are landlocked, and there will never be any development, any residential development at those sites. The second issue also concerns that so-called walkway. If they had called it a driveway, then I would imagine that they would allow us car access to the back of the buildings. And why do we need the access to the back of the buildings? Okay, those spaces has been restaurants ever since I can remember. We owned them for 15 years or 20 years. And even before we bought them, they were in an Italian restaurant. And with restaurants, you have constant cleaning grease traps, which is extremely messy. You have cars that come in and degrease the hoods and the air conditioning system, and all those trucks need access to the rear of the building. So right now, at that walkway, you have the dumpsters in the new design, and the waste, waste, will have to have access to those dumpsters. Well, we are requesting that our trucks that we need for the functioning of the business be allowed to come in and do the services that they have been provided for years. And then there is the issue of deliveries. Okay, so it is right now you have almost no loading zones around this area. And the reason is because the existing parking lot is being used as a delivery zone. You know, when you take that, when you build a new structure, all these delivery people, oh, how long do I have?
You've used up your 5 minutes. I think the board read all of your emails too, but if you could just try to wrap up quickly. But we have read your emails.
Okay. So the loading zones don't work, you know, because you have not only do the loading zones and the garage service, you know, the Waverly buildings, they also service Apple and CVS. Well, I want to briefly tell you about my objections to the new design of the garage. I think it's super massive. I suggested that they put 2 levels of underground parking and 4 of above ground, and instead they're having 5 levels of parking. I think that the screens are atrocious. There's no reason at all to have screens for parking. You're protecting the cars where you should be protecting the stairwell where people walk, you know, from the inclement weather, and glass in the stairwell would be really a great addition. And you know, leave it open, make it an organic garage, you know. Right? Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mrs. Wong. And Roxy Rapp.
Thank you. Roxy Rapp, 265 Litton. I also happen to own the building on the corner of Waverly and University. I have 2, well, first I want to say I support the garage 100%. I think it's great the city wants to do it and develop it, and it's the center of town, and I think it'll be really used a lot. The biggest problem I have, it's not big enough. As you know, we took employee parking out of the neighborhoods, and we're having a tremendous problem downtown, especially with the restaurant workers that not being able to find parking. And it's starting to have an effect on vacancies and restaurants and turning over now. So I think this would be a great opportunity for the city to do something about employee parking. And I think definitely you should go deeper. You should go 2 floors. There's no problem. Lot J&L is 3 floors. And I think you should go higher and make the top floor and maybe the bottom extra floor employee parking. You can do it with a gated, and it'd be terrific to be able to have employees to be able to close to their job and park and not have to circulate or be put way out and further out and have to come in. So I think you should definitely try to encourage that. The second thing is I would encourage you to have Ken talk to the owners of, especially the new owner of the Toy World building, and see what his plans are in the future. I'm pretty sure he plans to go up and do something really nice there. That's the Thoit family run by John Shank. And then Bradahikian family, who are another very good developers in town. I think you should try to find out what's going to go on there, just to be able to have a whole picture of what's going to happen there in those 2 major properties that are supporting the development. So I can't encourage you enough to try to get City Council and the Commission to accept a higher than 50 feet and to go lower. I think it's a great opportunity for the city, and I hate to lose it. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Rapp. Okay, let's move on to board member questions. I'm sure we have lots of questions. Peter?
Yes, good morning. A question for Architect Ken Hayes regarding the 10-foot setback between the garage and the Taipan building. Is it possible to
Excuse me, I'm sorry, 1 second.
My understanding is that you need that setback to allow the wall of the garage to be open for ventilation purposes.
Right.
But is it possible to reduce that setback? If it weren't a pedestrian alleyway, could it be closer to 5 feet? As I read the code, it seems to have some flexibility there.
I think for the amount of openings that we need 10 feet because we can't make it work with 25%, right? This is Michelle Wendler.
Thanks, Ken. Yes, Michelle Wendler from Watry Design. So when we have the 10 feet, we're allowed to have all of those be unprotected openings on that side. If we make it 5 feet, we can only have 25% of the area, and we need all of that area to make up the difference because we're so solid along the AT&T side and because of working with the openings around the rest of the facade. So.
Okay, so it's a matter of what percentage of openings you can have.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Wynn?
Questions for staff? These are, I don't know that you'll have the answers today. This is a very interesting corner, of course, and it's architecturally fascinating. Context, I should say. So I'd like to know more about the history of All Saints. Do I mean All Saints or All Souls? All Souls. All Saints, whatever. The Episcopal Church across the corner. And I'd like to know more about the AT&T building, particularly as it moves up towards Bryant. It has that elaborate brick facade. It's got arches. It's got the diagonal roof fading into the big rectangular block. I'd like to know what happened there. Why is it like that? Who designed it? What's it for? And then I'd like to understand more about the legal rights that the property owners facing on Waverly adjacent to the site might have. I understand that we have our own principles that say we're supposed to be, any structure going up is supposed to be respectful of what's around it. But I'm curious as to what kind of actual entitlements for access anybody might have, any of those property owners might have. And then I'm also curious about the extensive use of lane, whatever it is, 21, for trash bins. My understanding is that's not what those lanes are supposed to be used for. That means that buildings have to be designed to have them somewhere else. And in thinking about what I would think that this design should be accommodating or making space for, it would matter to me whether those present uses are essential, but probably in violation of local rules, or something the city wants to continue, or something we think over time might change. This is not kind of question, but one of my concerns here is that we would be trying to accommodate buildings that aren't long for this world in their present form. And so that's going to be something I'm going to be thinking about a lot. Thank you.
When can you clarify what you're looking for on the All Saints Church?
Some discussion in the environmental review of what that building's history is and what its design is and whether it is of cultural importance.
Oh, okay, interesting. There's been a church there as long as Palo Alto,
long time.
and they tore down the original church, which is originally something more like St. Thomas Aquinas, like that
Right.
size, a wood,
Right.
a little wood building, and then built the concrete building
Right,
to accommodate their congregation.
right.
And also on the AT&T building, that used to be the taller piece used to be just classic mid-century building, and then in the 80s, I remember when they sort of annexed the building next door, and they added all of the brick. Yeah, towards Bryant, and they added all of that brickwork at that same time, and the angle. That was all done at the same time, is my recollection. And then also on this particular site of the garage, there was a church. It was the first congregational church. It was a big shingle-style church right on the corner with big oak tree. Yeah, the existing parking lot.
Thanks. Oh, and I have one other question for staff. There's an oak tree on site. Is that too small to be protected?
I think it is a protected tree. So, but that's what the environmental review is going to cover.
Yeah, it's a protected tree, right?
Thank you.
And it's the one out.
It's a protected tree, but the arborist report. Could you come and speak in the mic for the record, please?
This is Gordon Knowles with Watry Design.
Hi, good morning. I'm Gordon Knowles with Watry Design. Our arborist report has looked through the trees in the area. I think the tree you're talking about is a protected tree. The arborist has reported that it's been previously damaged and isn't in good condition. And though we could try and protect it, and we've looked at options of possibly even moving the tree, he doesn't feel that actually with the damage that's to the tree, it would be viable to save as part of the process.
Thank you.
I have some questions for staff. I guess on the 10-foot passageway that's being proposed, has there been any thought about the passageway design? So, like, I was looking at the the Webster and Cowper Street garage, and it has about a 10-foot passageway with an arbor and lighting and vines and signage, and I was wondering if anything like that was considered for this site.
So the last sheet of the set would be the sheet to refer to as to the thinking thus far, and perhaps Mr. Hayes would have
I really don't think we've given it a whole lot of thought yet. They show a paving pattern right now. We show a paving pattern right now. But that whole space needs to be studied, how it relates to the garage, how it pulls people down to the elevator and the stair and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. There will be eyes on that space. I mean, there are windows into the adjacent building, and then the parking garage will be primarily open at that level.
Okay. So I would say, like, the living wall is like a really interesting idea. I've looked at some of the ones in San Francisco, and they're really beautiful. Like the one at SF MoMA is really gorgeous, and there's also the one at the private school near California. And I would just be, yeah, I guess my concern on that is just the scale of having the very tall wall of the garage, right? I mean, I'd be interested in seeing something that breaks down the scale. So if you're thinking about the living wall, is it only like 2 stories, or would you think it'd be even taller? Like that would be my question. Okay. Is really, you've got something, basically you've got something 10 feet wide and 50 feet high, right? And that's like a medieval street. So, I'd be curious to see how you mitigate the scale on that. I have some questions on I was wondering if staff could maybe talk a little bit about how the city is going to manage the parking. Because I've attended the council hearings, and I do understand that there's some discussion about changing how the garages are used. Is there any thought? I know this is not necessarily the board's purview, but I just want to say that there have been larger discussions out there about permits or attendance or whatnot, or active monitoring systems.
Okay, yeah. So we are, in this garage is going to have a parking wayfinding to help guide people to open spaces, so they'll be able to tell on each floor which spaces are available. At this point, I don't know what the Transportation Division and Planning is going to decide regarding how many permit spaces versus public spaces. That hasn't been discussed. I know for transportation, they have been discussing for future garages. We show on the plan there's provisional gates at the entrances that may be added later for future pay for parking. But again, that hasn't been decided on.
And then I have a question on the plans are showing a bike station. And is that intended to be similar to the outdoor bike racks? Or is this something else, like a supplement to the existing, to the bike share
So
system?
The desire for the bike station was requested by the Transportation Division. They want it to be similar to what's at the University Caltrain station lot, where it's, I think, a key access and a secure station, no attendant though.
And also a question for staff on lane 21. So the alley there. Has staff received any complaints about how that functions from the various businesses in its current configuration? Do we know anything about how it works? I mean, there's a lot of dumpsters. I walked through there yesterday. There's lots of dumpsters, which is pretty normal for our alleys downtown. But it's only 15 feet wide, right? So it's narrower than some of our other ones. What do we know about that?
I mean, over the years, there have been code enforcement cases, people putting pallets out, this kind of thing. This is true of many of the alleys downtown. There are dumpsters, and as buildings redevelop, we ask that people provide trash enclosure rooms, and then it becomes, please use those for the trash instead of for something else. But in this project, they're proposing the trash enclosure to handle the trash from those 2 or 3 businesses there on Waverly.
As well as the trash from the retail on our parking garage site.
Then we still have the CVS pharmacy and the other uses there, and Starbucks, et cetera, on University that have need for placing detritus in the alley.
Okay, and then my last question is regarding the 7-foot special setback on Hamilton. And I know we have that on many of the streets downtown, and it was originally used to widen the streets. And it's come up before on other projects on Hamilton, on several projects on Hamilton. And I was wondering what are you're proposing to change the zoning for this zone, or were you thinking that it'd be like a variance, and there would be findings for a variance for this?
So this is part of a larger discussion that will be with the Planning and Transportation Commission and Council, and that is for city public or for city parking garages that both below grade in a setback and above grade in a setback, that this would be a change to the public facilities zone development standards for this particular use. In this case, the public facilities zone standards require a 20-foot setback on any street, so which is actually wider than the 7-foot special setback. So, but yes, the original intent of those special setbacks was to widen the streets, and that plan has not, since the 1950s, come forward to widen Hamilton, so best. But in this case, with the geometries of the lot, it's really tough to meet that 7-foot setback, and so they're requesting the 5-foot encroachment, and we'll do that through a zone legislative decision by council.
Yes, when?
What would the setback be if this was a commercial development on this site?
If it was a commercial zone, 7 feet.
If we were looking at the adjacent uses that we have there, the retail and the whatever.
Yeah, it would be a 7-foot special setback on Hamilton.
From the property line.
Right, not a 20-foot.
But absent that special setback, if we already had as wide a street and sidewalk, because we wanted it to 0 setback.
Correct.
Thanks.
In the same
Peter.
vein, what would the setbacks be regarding the 16 and 10-foot walkways to the adjacent commercial buildings? If this were a standard commercial development in a CDC zone, would those setbacks be required?
There'd be no setbacks required in the CDC zone, which this is not going to be changed to a CDC zone, but yeah, to compare. And we can have, if you'd like, for the formal review, so you can understand what, you can see a comparison between the CDC, if it was a commercial building, and the CDC, if you'd like that.
It's okay. I'm just trying to understand where these parameters have come from, because they're restrictive on the design.
Okay, Q.
Could you explain how the trash will be picked up from the trash enclosure?
So I've been in talks with our refuse group. The trash collector will come down lane 21.
So a truck can navigate down lane 21?
Yeah, they do, because they have to pick up all the trash from Starbucks and everything. Yeah,
I didn't know if they come down lane 21 or if they actually access the parking
I think
lot.
they probably do both to come down the parking lot for the 3 buildings here for frontage, but there's quite a lot of trash bins along the university front businesses as well.
Okay. So to me, it seems like perhaps the enclosure doors then should be facing lane 21 and not the pedestrian access, but perhaps, I don't know, was there a reason that the doors are facing the pedestrian alley as opposed to the lane?
So,
That's a sure well, yeah. So we have a couple of different things happening on the frontage to lane 21. One is we have a mechanical exhaust duct coming up from the basement that needs to discharge out that direction. That's what's on the left corner. Then we have the access, the vehicular access. Right next to that is a shear wall. We have very limited places to put our seismic shear wall elements in this building. We've squeezed that in that particular location. And so we imagine that the dumpsters would be pulled out and around that shear wall.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no other questions? We're going to go to board member comments. Peter.
Thank you. I have 3 general rounds of ideas, directions, thoughts for this. The first one has to do with the overall site planning. Overall, I agree that it makes sense what you have here. I'm wondering if it wouldn't, I'm questioning the 10-foot pedestrian alley between Waverly Street and Inn. I think it's going to feel very tight. And I think that if you were to reduce that to more like 5 feet, you could actually get a greater setback along Hamilton, which I think would be really a good thing. And I think that when I look at the guidelines for the Hamilton Avenue again, it's asking for pedestrian connection from Hamilton through to University somehow. My office is very close to this site, and I walk past it several times a day, and the pedestrian traffic cutting from the corner of the AT&T building through behind Prolific Oven and out to University is pretty intense. I mean, I'd say every 30 seconds somebody's walking through there. I don't think that's going to change. What you're going to have the way this is designed is people walking through the parking lanes to make that same connection. Secondarily, I'm very sympathetic to the businesses in Taipan, Prolific Oven, whatever happens to the Toy Sport building, that they just need some means to service their business functions. And it's true that perhaps they're not legally entitled to that use of that land, but if we take that away, then they're just going to be trying to access things off of the diagonal parking on Waverly Street, which is really a hit to the community. That's just not an attractive thing. So I think we have to accomplish that somehow, which means that pedestrian access has to be somehow functional.
At the back of those buildings.
At the back of those buildings. And I think that unfortunately, we just have to accomplish that. And I don't know if it's 16 feet or 20 feet. You're very sympathetic again to you got to make the parking spaces work, and that's not easy. There's no squeezing on that. It has to work. But the thought process is that could that pedestrian access somehow just go clear out to Hamilton and then remove the pedestrian connection, the 10-foot connection over to Waverly Street? And it's not one of your options here, but looking at that, I think that's the pedestrian connection you need.
And force people through the garage, you're saying?
Essentially come up with a very creative garage design where you also have a pedestrian connection through. I say that because I think that's what's going to happen. If you go through a number of garages downtown today, the one over on the corner of Lytton and I think it's Waverly again, there's a lot of pedestrian traffic just cutting these corners, working their way through. It's a tight urban area. I think it's going to happen regardless. And maybe there's a creative way to get that connection and keep your parking functionality and better serve these businesses which are going to be impacted. And it better meets the guidelines of pedestrian connection from Hamilton. And I think the 10-foot alleyway out to Waverly is really just going to be a dark, almost dangerous, tight alley. That's also duplicated by lane 21 cutting through adjacent to it. In that same vein, I'm really struck that there's a little corner back there where the alley jogs, and there's 2 other buildings that are very likely, or 3, to be redeveloped.
Right here?
And yeah, and it feels to me that on the one hand, we're dealing with an incomplete set of information here because the city really could look into more what is going to happen with those buildings in that area. And then is there an opportunity to create some sort of a micro plaza back there, some sort of what you'd find in a European city, a little pedestrian areaway or something where, again, you mix the pedestrian with the functional needs. But right now, it's not being thought about, and we're developing it in reaction to what local businesses do. But when we're developing a garage like this, it's the opportunity for the city to try to take that into control. You do have one little green space indicated back there, but if you go back on these alleys during the day, in the evening, it's remarkable how many people, a guy taking a cigarette break, a couple having an argument, a person just pulling off the sidewalk to do something. These alleys are used, but they're not designed. And it's incumbent upon us as architects, as city planners, to take that into account, and maybe we can do something more back there. So again, my thoughts about the planning of this is that the 10-foot alley out to Waverly I don't think works, and I think you're missing an opportunity to make an important connection to Hamilton. My second set of thoughts really had to do with, I guess I confess to my fellow board members, I've just been struggling trying to understand the importance of the historic aspect of all the buildings around this. Clearly the post office is an important building. The Historic Resources Board seemed to, when I listened through to their discussion, seemed to say that they liked the idea of some sort of element on the garage that mimicked the height of the eave, a second-story line. I think Wynn pointed out very aptly that the church across the street is a very interesting, striking building. that doesn't seem to have been considered. And I guess I'm just really feeling like the ARB is in a bit of a vacuum here, understanding how much should we be considering? Should we be treating this Burge Clark building across the street as some sacrosanct thing we have to respond to, or can we ignore it? And what I'm sort of hearing everybody allude to is we need to pick up some of the details, maybe some metal detail or maybe an eave line. The best idea I heard was what Architect Hayes mentioned in the past meeting, was by having a bit more of a setback from the parking garage, you have a place where you can see and look at this wonderful building. And I have to say, I walk by that post office several times a day, and I always look at it, and it always brings a smile to my face. And maybe that's the best way to respect this, because I'm not sure by putting some clever iron detailing that's of our time, modern, but still alluding back to that it's going to work, or that it's really historically appropriate. And I don't think we want to put a bunch of masonry arches or a tile roof on this building. What I'm finding, though, is that there doesn't seem to be quite enough discussion about how we're fitting into the history or what we want it to be doing. And I really wish on the historic resources level that somebody who really understood the history of this was coming forward saying, this is how we ought to be approaching it. Because I think, again, we're reacting in small levels to it. That said, I did, in walking around, come to one idea that I think the post office and the Wells Fargo building and the church have in common a sense of enclosed outdoor spaces. The arcade along the post office, the covered two-story portico on the Wells Fargo building, the church has wonderful outdoor spaces around it. And it led me to think that the stair tower on the corner is an opportunity for what I would call an enclosed vertical space. And I understand that there's some concern about wanting it to be safe by being visible. At the same time, I think that that's the one place, Ken, where I think you're failing on the design. It just looks industrial and scary to me. If I were coming down with my kids, I'd really hold their hands tight.
Excuse me.
And
excuse me, Board Member Balte. Chair, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a break and just discuss a procedural matter with the chair. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break. Sorry about that.
I apologize to everybody, but it appears that I might have a conflict of interest in this project, so I'd like to recuse myself from any further participation at the moment while I check with the city attorney. So at this point, take what I said with a grain of salt, and I might be back later on. At the moment, I'm going to recuse myself from participating. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you.
And we do have to wait till he actually leaves the room in this. And then I think we'll go to Board Member Kim.
All right. This is a study session, so I'll just kind of go out of order. But I also agree that I feel strongly that the city should look at 2 underground levels and really trying to max out the parking lot as much as possible. With a certain sense of responsibility to the mass and scale with the neighbors. But when I look at some of these elevations, especially the Waverly elevations, and see those building outlines in the background, I don't see why adding another story to the top and also to the underground levels would be that detrimental. I was also thinking looking at seeing if there were ways to maybe reverse the ramp such that perhaps perhaps there's only like a half 6th level that is up against the AT&T building, and that way it would still remain 5 levels at the Waverly Street elevation. I realize there are complications with possibly reversing the ramp and so on and so forth, but just kind of ideas that I was thinking through. Another thing that I think is missing currently that could eventually play into the design of this is the solar canopy. I know it's been mentioned in some of the sections, and I'm just wondering, isn't there a possibility for that solar canopy to kind of tie itself into the design of the elevation of this garage as well, rather than it being kind of an afterthought and stuck on?
Actually, can Michelle, I have Michelle just address that real quick on the solar?
Yeah, it's a study session. I guess that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I know this is comments, but.
Just currently in our program and in the budget, solar panels are not in the project, although we are designing for the future possibility to add the solar panels into the project. So looking at the architectural implications, that's possible, but it's currently not in the project that was given by council.
Well, I'll just say for the record that I feel that that's a huge shame.
Yeah, so it's good to get the
and
feedback.
that's a disservice to the public and to this building project, actually. Moving on, some other comments that I have with regards to the circulation of the garage. I think there are some things that bother me enough, such as these dead-end aisles on every floor. If I'm coming up the ramp and I need to, there's basically these dead ends that tie into the lane 21 area of each floor of the ramp, except for the first floor. I was also thinking that perhaps the entry and exit from lane 21, maybe that can only be an exit only. I don't know if we want to encourage public to access lane 21 from Waverly just to enter the garage. And that would also free up those extra 2 stalls that could be deleted or may have to be deleted if the original gate for entry from lane 21 as well. I was also, looking over the different options. At first, I really appreciated the option 1 and 3, where you have this taller arcade element that kind of relates to the Taipan building. But listening to discussions and reading emails of possibilities of redevelopment along that Waverly set of buildings there, I'm wondering if that's a strong enough element that the parking garage should try to tie itself into, especially if that building is going to get redeveloped or changed. But for now, I mean, I guess if we're assuming that building's staying there the way it is, I do like the way that it ties into that. So the element that ties into that is the retail. I'm a little bit concerned about the proportions of the retail space as far as the depth and the height It doesn't appear that the first floor of the parking garage is any taller. And I know that retail has preferred heights. I did read in the staff report that perhaps it's a florist or some other kind of specific retail that may not require the height, but I just wanted to put it out there as a comment. And also looking at the bike station, I noticed that there's an intake right in front of the bike station entry. In my opinion, I don't know what the intake's going to look like, but sometimes it can make for a situation where it really turns people off from wanting to enter and exit that bike station. And I think, the city's desire to have a bike station there is great and wonderful, but we should try to make that entry and exit experience a little bit more favorable to the people that are using it. I also wanted to make a note on the different stairs that you were showing at the corner of Waverly and Hamilton. While I personally prefer the overall design scheme of option 3, I felt that the stair kind of dying into the wall as you come down onto the street level probably wasn't favorable. I do prefer something like option 1 or 2 where they kind of exit out onto either street as opposed to the wall of the parking garage retail area. And then, in the future, as this comes back as a preliminary review or formal application, I'd like to see some 3D views of the alleyways, and I realize that they're still underdeveloped, but I think those are important for us to see. And I think that's it as far as my initial comments.
Okay. Thanks, Board Member Kim.
Wynn.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I did watch the council's deliberations on this, and so did see much of the staff report and the study presented to them, and it was a very impressive amount of thinking and research. But it's gone into this. I know this area very well because I've lived near it, but not within 500 feet of for 18 years. And I patronized the post office and CVS and Prolific Oven and all those areas at the farmer's market. So it's of great interest to me. So first I started thinking about the context, and that one of my concerns is that we don't seem to have been thinking about the church across the street. Heavily used outdoor space. That's not just a kind of not too well kept front lawn. That's an assembly space. And their courtyard goes in and out. It's going to be sort of across the street from this. That should continue to be something desirable. Another thing I wanted to say about context is what I think of as the Wells Fargo building. It's kind of classic Wells Fargo in the sense that it's red brick. But that building is fascinating because it is set way back with those big, elaborate porches, terraces, galleries, large elements that come over planters. It's also really impressive if you ever use the ATM there because the flowers are at shoulder height. So instead of having, flowers at knee level with cigarette butts in them, you have really impressive landscaping that is a pleasure to be around. With respect to the Burge Clark Post Office, which I understand we owe to Lou Henry Hoover, just like the Girl Scout House, because she had her husband call the then President of the United States and say, no, we're not having Federalist here. We have a very good local architect, and so we got this building. However, if you look at the entry, it's true that it's shades of, I guess, stucco. It's very square, and it has what looks like a National Recovery Act eagle on it. I think that's the most, so it's very austere and rectangular. I realize it's round, but it looks very squared off and formal. We seem to have a lot of volunteer trees in front of the post office. It's all great to look at. I think Councilmember Filseth pointed out that one of the pleasures of walking down Waverly and along this parking lot, and generally it's a hot, glary, unpleasant corner with a restroom, is that you get to see that entry. So I think preserving, to the extent possible, the ability to see that portion of the building would be valuable. Not that the rest of the building isn't lovely, but it's more lovely as experienced. I'm also concerned that when we spend these many, many millions of dollars, we don't spend too much time and money and design compromising important project goals for buildings that may not stay long or that logically under our existing zoning will change. Then I thought a lot about the current functions of this surface parking lot. One of the things that I think I see is that this is a place I can always find a parking place. It would be nice to pretend that I never drive over there, but I do. Often on my way home from somewhere else, and I can always find a parking place. There's always 1 or 2 spaces available, and if there aren't, there will be within 90 seconds. So an important part of this in supporting retail is quick in and out parking, which is not served by having a whole bunch of electric charging stations on the ground floor, in my view. I won't say anything about the urge to key Teslas while trying to find a parking place, but I think we should think about what, by definition, you don't use charging stations for a 5 to 15 minute stop. They should be somewhere else. Put them in the basement. Do electric car? Not yet. The other thing I've been thinking a lot about, and actually complaining to staff a lot about for years, is there is no bicycle parking. You guys want me to ride my bike, but I end up climbing through the Algerian ivy or lifting my bike up onto the bumpers, the curb next to the cyclone fence next to the AT&T building, because there's nowhere to put a bike, unless you want to trip people on their way into CVS. So I think quick in and out bike parking is also important. I don't need a bike station for running into CVS for 15 minutes. So I think bike stations, more secure parking might be important, but I also think that accessible, in fact, I'm sure it is for some people, places to park are an important part of this. You're just across the street from the farmer's market. That's the other big function that happens around here. The front of the AT&T building is a major place for workers to take breaks because there's benches, seating areas integrated into it, and as members of the public pointed out, you can look, it's got a good view. You look across at an attractive place. There's great landscaping on the parking lot across, what is the name of the street? Hamilton. You know, that's more fabulous landscaping. So it really makes it an inviting place. So I'm expecting to see great landscaping with flowers. Which brings up the point, if you're going to have a living wall, I want to see the endowment that goes with it. I love the SF MoMA living wall, which among other things, features agapanthus growing out horizontally, but that must cost a great deal of time and energy and expertise to maintain. And the last thing I guess I want to say about context is all those corners go in and out, let your eye go into the building, let you walk along and still see the street, but in a protected way. I'm sure that All Saints doesn't, have the kind of maintenance budget it would like. That's not a great wildlife habitat on the corner yet, and I know it's heavily used for other purposes. But these are inviting spaces for the eye. They let you go in and out, and I think that would be important to have here. I also want you to show me a design that's going to let me see the corner towards the bay of the post office as soon as possible as I walk up Waverly. And I think if you're going to have 50-story buildings, you need at least some 40-foot landscape elements, whether they grow up from the bottom or not. I am not in favor of maintaining trees that we think aren't going to make it in the longer run. Pedestrian access is interesting. It is a heavily used area. However, I don't think the alley from Waverly may be heavily used by people who work there, by people who are making deliveries, by people who are doing service work, or servicing these buildings. As far as I can tell, pedestrians walk through CVS. You just walk, you come straight out of the sidewalk on University, you walk through, you walk through the parking lot, and you're over here. I am not in favor of a walkway from Waverly that's shared with motor vehicles. I don't think that's a walkway. I'm also not really in favor of a 10-foot wide walkway with 50-foot walls next to it. So I tend to think that that space would be much better used on the Hamilton front of the building. Okay. I'm perplexed by the staircase. Generally, I like the idea of visible staircases. I may be having trouble understanding how these staircases work and look. But I think we have some less than successful parking lot staircases in town. I'm not particularly fond of the one across the street from, which park?
The one on Bryant?
Yes. There seems to be consensus on this point. It doesn't work. I mean, it seems askew. I don't see people using it. It's hot when it's sunny. It's wet when it rains. I'm very familiar with the Claremont parking garage.
So am I.
I spent more time, Ken.
You did.
You were just visiting your daughter. I was one of the people who put together the redevelopment agency. What works on is the broader, shallow steps at the lower level. They are kind of gracious. They invite you in, but it's because they're wide and relatively shallow, and they only go part way. Then it gets a little more whatever. That is an incredibly busy parking lot. You are never up there by yourself. It is always occupied because that's a retail zone with a hotel across the street and a train track on the back. I don't particularly like the staircases, the look of the staircase coming out to the street, but I don't know what should be done, but I don't like the way these things appear to the point where I wondered if they should be tucked up against the AT&T building instead so that you could have more setback for greenery in view. I don't know. But I do think if you can move the building back another 5 feet, that'll help. Retail. I didn't read the city council to say they wanted 1,700 square feet of retail. I heard them to say they wanted retail that was functional, that was going to be highly equitable and desirable for some kind of use. And I do understand the paradox that as you make it bigger, it generates its own parking demand. But I think we have seen sort of token commercial. When we have districts which require commercial, that's not really what's driving the redevelopment. And then we get commercial that we're quite skeptical about. So it would be important to know that this is designed for real-world successful retail, or whatever other permitted use we have in that area. I'm also concerned about the lack of public restroom facilities there. I think they're hard to design into parking garages, but it's a long way to the nearest restroom. There's nothing in the parking. I mean, there actually is one somewhere if you find it in the Wells Fargo building, but it's a long way. So I would be interested in that. I don't know if it's possible to essentially say we think if pedestrians can't be bothered to walk around the corner, which is now going to be lovely and attractive with benches and planting, that the cut-through basically should be satisfied. By cut-through, I mean the policy that encourages interblock pedestrian connection. If we just be sure that that's designed so that when, in fact, people cut through that, which they're going to do all the time, it's reasonably safe for them to do so. I don't know how you do that, but I think it's important. Let's see, I have a whole bunch of notes. The other thing is, this is a really interesting project because the city is struggling to maximize a bunch of desirable things, including the number of parking spaces. And we've had to make serious compromises, and the council has in the past. If you look at Heritage Park, staff didn't recommend Heritage Park. Staff said Heritage Park is too expensive. Neighborhood went berserk, and we have Heritage Park, and I don't think anybody regrets it, and we were able to attract private funding to develop it. More on point, the Opportunity Center was a site both graced and constrained by great big trees. And we were looking at building not only low-income housing, but no-income housing on that site. Every unit is precious. I think we sacrificed 2 to 3 to preserve those trees, and I think it's been totally worth it. So I would bear that in mind when thinking about how this works. I do hope that this redevelopment lets us make the existing alley work better for whatever it needs to work for. I'm not sure that casual pedestrian cut-through is going to be much of it, but I don't know. In terms of the designs, I found the rectangular window attachments unconvincing. The AT&T building's very formal. Everything is balanced, symmetric. I don't know if they use the golden mean, but it's very formal. And I don't think quoting it works at all. I also don't think quoting other elements necessarily works. I do notice the great, the preponderance of creamy stucco and brick and tile, and those might be things to learn from. I went to Stanford in the 60s, and we had the original Richardson Romanesque, and then we had, to use the technical term, really stupid buildings that had a lot of yellowish stucco with little tile veneer roofs on top, most of which have now been torn down because they started to just build well-designed buildings that, because of their setbacks, their landscaping, their parapet heights, their materials, complemented those existing buildings and respected them. That's more what I'm looking for. I do sort of like the idea of a different element, a different thing going on lower down. This is a very tall structure next to a very tall structure. And I kind of have liked, at least in the drawings we've seen, the idea of something lighter at the top. I mean, I'm certainly not looking for 5 stories of stucco.
Right.
On the 50-foot height limit, that's not a council directive, that's a voter directive, right? That's a ballot measure.
The 50-foot height limit in the city is a comprehensive plan,
Well,
as
it's
well
not
as
just a comprehensive plan, right? It's a voter enacted initiative.
it came out of that era.
We've never repealed it, right? It's a voter directive. We don't get to change it. Am I confused? Is it changed? That's why we had to have an override vote to do the new center, Stanford Medical Center buildings.
That had a rezoning to a different zone. But
We had to have voter approval to go over 50 feet.
We'll take a
So
look.
could we?
I know it's a comp plan policy.
I believe it's a voter initiative, so it was not a council idea. So we need to check and see. I don't know if they stuck it in the charter or just did it as they could have done it as an initiative ordinance rather than a charter amendment, but double check. Because PAMF was built, in many ways it would make sense for that building to be taller. Any health care facility is easier to move by elevator than long corridors, but I think we were constrained by that. So if you could check. Maybe we repealed it, but that's not what I understood.
So I'm sorry, are you in favor, if it's not, are you in favor of a taller structure?
I have no idea. I think the damage is done by the time you get up that high. So I don't know that I can tell the difference between 60 or 50 feet. But I think we've been core on structures above the 50 feet, if it is a voter mandate. I hope that I realize that there are lots of problems, but I share the view that's been expressed by others that it's a pity not to go down 2 floors. We've been looking at a lot of projects, and we keep struggling to approve them, particularly downtown or in the areas around downtown, if they don't have 2 below parking, because you can't get what you want above ground if you don't have 2 floors below ground. And more recently, we've been looking at a hotel that's proposed at Suhong on El Camino, and it's next to Palo Alto Redwoods. And Palo Alto Redwoods is, what's the density? It's high, like 50, or somebody looked that up for me, 50 or 60 dwelling units per acre. It's fully parked, it's got great loading zones, it's massively landscaped, and it works because they have 2 floors of underground parking and a big, deep site. But I'm concerned that we're going to really regret it if we don't go under. We also have parking lots that encroach into the street underground. It's our street. I don't know what kind of utilities, it's mostly our utilities. Have we seriously studied encroaching into the street and what we could get there? I would think we would want to do that. Because I think if you're going to build a garage, boy, do you want it to everything you can. I also, and I'm sure other people think about this too, if you're going to spend this many millions of dollars for cars, I would like us to think about its next use, whether it's housing or whatever. I understand the load factor for parking garages is so huge that actually the load factor is not a problem for convertible uses, but it's about are the plates flat and a few other things. So I have to know if how we've considered that. There seems to be an exhaust vent over by the, at this point, 10-foot pedestrian alley from Waverly, kind of near its entry. It shows on sheet PK 2.1.
Here?
I don't know what that's about, but that tends to be uninviting to go into a, well, I don't think that's an inviting space anyway, but if you were going to keep that as a 10-foot alley, that tends to discourage people from walking in. Sorry.
It would be up high.
Okay, that's what I wondered. So it's up high.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be bothering us. It's just something going by.
Yeah.
But I do think that this does not strike me as an alley I would like to go down. I think of our funny little alley adjacent to the historic building. Is it from Florence to? No, that one works. It's short. It's straight. It's well lit. It's wide enough. The buildings are short. No, this is next to.
420 Florence?
Yes, I think. It's the one, it's the garage that fronts on Bryant and then I guess backs up on Florence, right? And there's this funny little zigzaggy thing, and it's not a pedestrian access way. It's a...
You're saying from Lytton?
Yeah, from Lytton. The one that it wanders by the historic building. It's because it needed to be done to accommodate a complex setting. But this, I don't think this is going to be where people walk. So I don't think we should dedicate a lot of space to it if we can pull the building back and do better on Hamilton. That's my thought at the moment.
Thank you, Wynn. Okay, so great. Thank you to the staff and also and to Ken. I think the packet and how you presented the project were perfect for preliminary. So I guess the first thing that I want to say is that I have not read the HRB minutes yet because we just got them today. But I have been talking to other board members about other historic projects. And I think there's some unhappiness about the way we've been reviewing new buildings when they're adjacent to historic buildings. And so I've been doing some research on my own about this. And like in Philadelphia, there's an organization and they try to sort of frame the discussion about the design of new buildings. So like you could have literal replication of a historic building, right, on a new site, or you'd use that style but come up with something new within that style, or you could just make an abstract reference, which would be Ken Hayes' preferred way, or you could just do a completely different strategy. You do something completely different, and you just respect the old as old. Maybe you can't replicate, an old colonial building, but you just make it completely different. And so there are these 4 strategies, and we don't really talk about them. We sort of talk about the projects on the, like cornices and metalwork, respecting the, like, similar to the post office, but we don't really actually talk about the 4 strategies and which strategy would be the best for a particular site. And I think that's probably should have happened on some of our other recent projects like Avenidas and whatnot. And also we have like the junior museum project. And I think that there's some sentiment on the board to try to elevate the level of discussion about that and debate about these different strategies. Okay, so there's that. On the site plan, I have several concerns that have been mentioned before. Yeah, which is one, the 10-foot passageway. It just seems like it could be a very sort of dark, undesirable place if it's not designed correctly. I've also been concerned about exiting this garage onto lane 21, which is only 15 feet wide and it's one way. I'm also concerned about as cars enter the garage from Hamilton, I'm concerned about queuing and stacking because once car enters the garage, they have to decide, are they going straight, or they're going right, or they're going up the ramp. And so that seems to me to be a tricky point where we could actually end up with a lot of delays there, with people not trying to figure out where they're going. On the retail depth, I think it's been mentioned before, there's concern about the dimensions of it. And so if you have like a 25-foot deep retail space, my unscientific survey of downtown is that's going to be one of the shallowest spaces downtown. We have some barbers in the President and also the Cardinal Hotel, and they're like around 28 feet. I think there's a little ice cream place on University that may be around 28 or 30 feet. But I mean, most of the time they're like 40 or 50 or more in depth. And so you're just going to limit the types of tenants that are going to be able to go into it. And then you actually also within that 25-foot depth, you're going to have to take out like handicapped accessible bathroom. So you're taking out 7 or 8 feet from that depth. So you just have to give caution to staff that there is that it's very desirable to put the retail space in there, but we may be limiting, the number of types of tenants that could utilize that space. On the options, I think I'm in agreement with. I guess it was the HRB sentiment, right, which is something in between option 1 and 2. I think I'm sort of there.
I thought it was 1 and
1 and 3. Yeah, 1 and 3 with some openings on the upper levels.
Right.
I think that sounds fine. 2 seems top heavy to me. Having like 4 floors of garage over a low base. And then I think the other concern I would have on option 2 is that it really requires the hand of like a very skilled designer, as yourself, but it's really tricky. Like if you look at like the Federal Building in San Francisco, architects make a lot of mistakes with perforated metal. It's very hard to get the right proportions of openings on the perforated metal, and the public just doesn't like them at all. And then with all the different meshes, sometimes they look good. Like there's a mesh on one of the UC Mission Bay buildings.
Yeah, right.
It looks great from one direction, and then you sort of look at it from the other direction, and it doesn't look so great. It's kind of it's a tricky material, I think, to use. It has its place for sure. Anyway, it seems to me like something in between 1 and 3 is safer.
I mean, now 1 also has a mesh or a metal of some kind.
Yeah.
But there's ways to mitigate that kind of impact. I mean, it could be like a bronze kind of color. So it's a real earth. It's not a shiny, metallic metal.
Yeah,
but
no, there's definitely a place for mesh in the right. They're beautiful meshes out there. Some of them are very expensive, right? So there's definitely room in there to work with. I do want your Hamilton Avenue facade. I think you're showing you're trying to make some recesses in there, and I do want to see how that works with the arcade of the post office, how they look together in perspective. Um, and I'm curious to see if the board wants to see a sun study on this, on how it would impact the Waverly Street properties, especially if they're proposing residential uses there. It seems to me having a very tall garage on the southern side of those properties is going to impact the sunlight on those, although we don't really have any requirements. I don't think we have any requirements on in the downtown zone for that. And one just nitpicky item that I've seen on other garages that have had to have fire sprinklers. Like, so if you had to have fire sprinklers, right, you're not normally required to have them, but you might have to if you have a retail use.
Yeah, we'll have fire sprinklers.
So I've seen, there's one near my house where they just didn't figure out where to put all of the standpipes, and they do this zigzag thing in the outdoor staircase on the corner, and it looks terrible. Yeah. So I trust you to figure out where that goes.
Right. Can you comment a little bit, Chair Liu, about the corner entrance and the stair?
Yeah, you know, I'm undecided on the staircases. So when I use the staircases, like in San Francisco, like I prefer the staircases to be completely open. First, they feel safer, even if they're exposed. It just seems to me like a nicer experience. But then when I look at it, like I think about all of the Burge Clark buildings and whatnot, I'm not sure that I want to see this big open staircase with the big wing wall that goes all the way up. And then the other thing that I think about too is that on the outdoor staircases is usually like in the hand of an unskilled lighting designer, they'll just put these really ugly wall pack lighting and exposed conduit on there, and so it doesn't look that great at night. I do trust that you would sort of design the lighting to be attractive there. Yeah. My taking is is a little modern. I could go. I'm open.
Okay.
My take on it was something more enclosed, but I'm flexible on that. And
thank you.
So I think that's all that I have. Any other closing comments? Yes, Wynn.
Elizabeth Long mentioned underground connectivity to the adjacent parcels, which we did in the 800 block, or the city did, in the 800 block of High Street to accommodate affordable housing on an adjacent site.
Right.
So I think under the right circumstances, that can work. That did involve funding from both parcels. On the staircase, I was suddenly thinking of the ornamental staircases with tile risers around, across the street on Ramona, which is probably not appropriate here. But I think there's enormous variation in the attractiveness of staircases. I think lighting makes a huge difference, and I look forward to seeing that. And then I just wanted to tell staff that on the 50-foot ceiling limit, I'm perfectly willing to believe that I'm dead wrong. I was just terrorized by the city attorney who hired me into believing it was sacred. But I would like to know the history of that, because I thought that we had to do a ballot measure for the most recent Stanford Health project because it was going to exceed 50 feet. So I look forward to understanding where I came across that misapprehension, if it is one.
Any closing comments, Ken?
No, I don't.
Okay,
thank you very much for your comments, and we look forward to coming back.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we have approval of minutes. We have two sets. We have two. Well, the minutes were sent by email.
Thinking I missed one of those meetings.
Ah, yes.
So you don't have a form.
Okay. So should we do? You want to do the August 17th?
So moved.
I don't have any comments on them.
Move approval.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Okay. So then for the minutes for August 3rd, we will push this back to a future agenda. Okay. And we have one last item, which is subcommittee.
So before adjournment of the full board, I would just like to note on Jody's behalf that, let's see, packet page 6, there are some corrections needed. Obviously today, sorry, on the 21st, which it says the 22nd,
Right.
That's the 21st, Board Member Firth will not be attending. And then the dates thereafter are a day off, so we'll fix that on the next packet. Thanks.
That I have a conflict of interest with respect to Avenidas because I live within 500 feet of the corner of the park, so I will not be participating in the subcommittee.
Thank you, Alex, for agreeing to step in for that.
Okay, so we're adjourned.
Yeah. For cooler places. Cooler and foggier. Do you want us to come up there? That would be great. I feel, wow. I feel privileged.